evening. Again, this evening we're going to talk about the difference between conviction and convenience. And one of the things that we need to stop and take a moment to talk about with conviction is the fact that you probably know some very convicted people in your life that irritate you. It's one of the problems with conviction, right? Is that sometimes you're like, yeah, you're very convicted, and you're an unenjoyable human being to be around. Conviction is an unfortunate side effect. The political realm is a realm we've certainly seen that, right? Where people were very convicted of their views, had very deep-seated feelings, and it led to not open and valuable conversation, right? But everybody starts loading their guns, if they have them, and firing at each other across social media. Conviction, in and of itself, is not necessarily a good thing. This is the problem. And you have had experience with conviction that's gone wrong. And what we often do in life is we see something go awry, and we say, well, I don't want to be anything like that. Right? You see the way that people treat each other when they have deep convictions over the wrong kinds of things, or certainly at least things that are not of an eternal consequence. And you say, look, I'm not interested in that whatsoever. We need to have biblical conviction. So when we're talking about the idea of having conviction, we're not just talking about having conviction as a general thing, right? Some people you will meet in life are very convicted people, and you say, well, man, they don't ever take the convenient path. They're very set in their ways, and they are very much willing to choose the hard path, but boy, nobody wants to be around them. They're unenjoyable human beings, and in fact, sometimes that conviction, you will see people who are deeply convicted, and they end up becoming kind of embittered people who you don't want to be around them, and you think that they may not even really want to be around themselves, right? So we need to compare biblical conviction to the idea of just having conviction, right? And so 1 Kings 18 was a verse that we looked at. We're going to kind of review just a couple of verses that we touched on in the last sermon, and then we'll move on to some new material. 1 Kings 18, Elijah said, how long will you hesitate between two opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him, but if Baal, follow him. Conviction is important, biblical conviction especially, because there are some things that you do not have the option of not having conviction. To not make a choice is a choice. That's what Elijah was saying up on Mount Carmel. Look, you are hesitating between two opinions. You haven't decided, do we want to follow Jehovah or do we want to follow idols? And if you haven't decided whether you want to follow Jehovah or you want to follow idols, you have made the decision. You're following idols. Right? It is the default, right? Love the Lord your God with all your heart and soul and mind and strength. And if you haven't decided whether you want to do that, what are you by default doing? Not loving the Lord with all your heart and soul and mind and strength, right? So there are some areas of life you have to have a conviction. There are plenty of other areas you don't. Like the classic one is, what do you want for dinner? And the answer in my house is, whatever everybody else wants, right? I am perfectly, give me calories. That's what I want, right? I want something to get down the neck, but I'm not entirely set on one specific thing. And I think it's perfectly fine that I don't have conviction on it, right? I don't have to have a deep, strong opinion on every food item that I eat, or everywhere that we might go on vacation, or what we would do at any given moment. It's perfectly fine. When I moved to Louisville, a very big college football town. In my cul-de-sac, I kind of live in a little neighborhood, and in our cul-de-sac, you have the two big colleges are the University of Louisville and the University of Kentucky. And so you've got U of L Cardinals, and then you have the UK Wildcats. And I am not joking, in my initial meeting with the congregation, where we were trying to talk about whether or not I would move my family across the country to preach the gospel in Louisville, that we might save souls for the sake and the cause of Jesus Christ, I was asked, cat or card? Which one? Which one, cat or card? And most people chuckled, but some people were really intense, right? And so I said, look, I'm in Switzerland right now. Is that okay? And most people were okay. Some people, I think that what they finally decided is, we'll convert, right? Like that's what they decided. Okay, we're going to bring him here to help us bring people to Jesus. We'll bring him over to be a U of L fan. There are certain things it's okay to hesitate between two opinions. Jesus Christ is not one of those. The interesting thing about Jesus is if you read through the life of Jesus and the way that Jesus preached, C.S. Lewis, of all the writers, I think, arguably said it best. Jesus left no room for you to vacillate between opinions. C.S. Lewis said, if you read, you will find that Jesus is either Lord, liar, or lunatic. When somebody speaks like Jesus does and says, come worship me and follow me and I'll die for you and you can go to heaven, that guy either really is telling the truth, in which case he's Lord, or he's a liar, he's a really wicked guy, right? We have cults that are started by people who say, look, I'm the Messiah, come follow me, and we'll wait for the starship. Right? That's a liar. Or the third is, he's the crazy guy you see on the street corner of a big city, and you go, give him a wide berth as we walk around, kids. He's got mental health issues. Jesus does not leave room for you to say, he's kind of a nice guy. Right? Jesus is a good philosopher. I like him kind of like I like Plato and Socrates. He's got some really good ideas. I like him and I like Buddha. No, he can't. Just doesn't leave room for that. He has left no room to be a good philosopher. He is Lord, or he's liar, or he's lunatic. Pick one. In Revelation chapter 3, verse 15 through 16, God makes it clear to the church at Laodicea, which these are already people who have said Jesus is the Messiah. Right? So the conviction issue isn't just an issue before you're a Christian. It's a continual assessment of yourself you're going to have to do your whole life. Because the church of Laodicea had already said, we believe Jesus is the Messiah. They were already baptized into Christ. They already had assessed themselves as being sinners who needed to turn to the Savior. And then what is said in Revelation 3? You're lukewarm. You didn't start out lukewarm. You became lukewarm. Right? You ever turn the tap on and at first it's nice and hot, but then as the water heater starts running out, it starts to become lukewarm. It was hot. What happened? That's his point. You got to make a continual assessment. And just like the scripture reading that we just read, Joshua says the same thing. Look, make your choice. But you must make a choice. God will not remove your free will. If you want to walk away, he will absolutely allow it. It won't make it happen. He won't enjoy it. But remember, when Jesus walked this earth, he had 12 men that were closer to him than any other human being on this planet. And one of them chose to walk away, and Jesus led. Now he said, when people want to snatch you out of my hand, he says, that won't happen. Nobody can take you away from Jesus, but if you want to walk away, that's your choice. But you've got to make a choice. Conviction is required, biblically speaking. But the wrong kind of conviction, like we kind of talked about, can lead to some problems. So let's just talk about some of the things that we sometimes don't like about heavily convicted people. One is rash behavior. Heavily convicted people, sometimes they're so convicted of something, they just speak without thinking. They don't think about your feelings. They don't think about the consequences. They don't use any wisdom. And they are the bull in the china shop. And I will tell you, that there are Christians I know who I love dearly, who that is absolutely their way of modeling Christianity. Let me just say it without thinking. Let me just do it without assessing. Let me just be the bull in the china shop, but it's because I'm convicted. If you look at Philippians chapter 4, verse 5, he says, let your reasonableness be known to everyone. The Lord is at hand. If I am talking with somebody who has a different view than me of what is right and wrong, whether that means I'm talking to a fellow Christian that we differ on some idea, or I'm talking to somebody who thinks they're a Christian, but to the best of my understanding, biblically they are not, or I'm talking to somebody who's just purely irreligious, and there's a difference between us. We can have differences all day long. But no matter what, no matter how much I disagree with it, no matter how convicted I am right that Jesus is the Messiah and Buddhists won't get you there, what should I always be showing? It says in Philippians. It says right up there, let your reasonableness be known to everyone. If I disagree with somebody, and I know that I have the truth, that's conviction, right? I know I have the truth. I don't have, let me back up for a second. I used to work at a zoo. So I used to work at a zoo, and I was entirely surrounded. I was fully invested in the sciences. And so I was entirely surrounded by atheistic evolutionary people. Darwinian evolution was the doctrine of the zoo, right? And you go there, and we all came from monkeys, and I'm like, not my family, but it doesn't matter, right? Speak for yourself. And the entire idea that we've come from this amoeba to me sort of process is just everywhere in zoos, right? I then have a choice. I can walk into work, guns blazing, and say, you're all a bunch of idiots. Now, let me tell you, Romans says that is exactly true. Romans chapter 1 says that those who suppress the truth about God in unrighteousness are fools. It says that the evidence of God in the design, in the creation, is so clearly seen that to not recognize a creator is foolish. I don't care what area of science you look in, I will show you design. In fact, at the same zoo that I worked at, it was just Darwinian evolution everywhere, they would have plaques up for different animals. And they would say, look at the design of the snout of this animal. When you read a plaque in the zoo that says, look at the design of the snout of this animal, I want you to ask the question, if there's a design, where's the designer? The very stuff that they're putting up to talk about, ooh, look at this adaptation. Look at how well it's designed. Accidents aren't designed. I could walk in there, guns blazing, and say, you're all a bunch of fools, and I would have biblical evidence that's true. But would that make me reasonable?
I'm still muted. I just unmuted myself. Would that make me reasonable? Right, there's the key. I'm going to be more effective with my conviction that everybody needs Jesus if I'm reasonable in our disagreements. So, yeah, biblical conviction, it doesn't look like the conviction that says, oh, you're wrong, let me call you an idiot and slam the door in your face. That's the wrong kind of conviction. Because that also comes along with pride, right? Have you ever met somebody who had deep convictions and you thought, well, they're really, really proud? Ecclesiastes 7, be not overly righteous and do not make yourself too wise. Why should you destroy yourself? One of the fascinating passages in Ecclesiastes 7, be not overly righteous. You have to keep this in context. In Ecclesiastes 7, when he says, be not overly righteous, he's not saying, stop trying to do the right thing. That's not the point of Ecclesiastes. He'll say, oh, the best thing you could do is just compromise your morals a little bit. You'll fit in. That's not what he's saying. He's saying, Don't be the kind of high and mighty person that looks down your nose at other people. That's not conviction, that's pride. And it's a funny thing. It's a funny thing how it works, and not funny like ha ha, funny like that smells funny. Okay? The devil is very crafty. You become a Christian because you recognize, I have got a bunch of problems. Right? You've got to be cut to the heart to become a Christian. There has to be a recognition of sin that I need saving from. So I become a Christian so that Jesus would transform me, so that he would forgive me, and then I'm going to follow him instead of myself. Because me didn't work. Right? Me got me in trouble. Me got me broken. And so I'm not going to do that anymore. I'm going to follow Jesus. And so then we follow Jesus. An amazing thing begins to happen when you begin to follow Jesus. When you begin to do the things that he says, your life begins to change. And so you start making better choices. And you have a lot less regrets. And you avoid a lot of problems. And then one day, you look down and you've made all this progress. And the temptation, this is where he's so crafty. Satan gets you to go, look at this person I am. Better than these other blokes. That's not conviction, that's pride. Far too often, we allow Jesus to transform us, and then we take the credit. That's the danger. Don't let it happen. Biblical conviction does not look like that. It doesn't say, oh, look at how righteous I am. It says, look at how forgiven I am. Remember, the only person who's ever been truly righteous sat down and ate with tax collectors and sinners. He was not too good for anybody, though arguably he's too good for all of us. Another thing is conviction can sometimes lead to you not being a very good listener. Because after all, if I'm right, what am I going to listen to you? Right? I mean, I've got the answer. I figured it out. Why are we having this conversation? It's your turn to listen because I'm right. That's not biblical conviction. That's worldly conviction. Conviction in and of itself is not always good. Biblical conviction, this is true, by the way, of many, many, many things. Riches can be good if handled biblically. Riches, if you don't have a biblical mindset, are the worst thing to ever happen to you. Right? You take these athletes, and they don't have any sort of good moral compass. They don't have good advisors, and you hand them millions of dollars at 19. What happens? Nothing good, right? But it's not money that's the problem. It's an unbiblical mindset towards it. Right? You put money in the hands of somebody who has the wisdom of God and the humility, they're going to do great. Conviction is the same way. You need biblical conviction. And biblical conviction takes what James chapter 3 says in verse 17. And it says, but the wisdom from above is first pure, and then peaceable, and then gentle, reasonable. We had that reasonable word again. Full of mercy and good fruits, unwavering and without hypocrisy. James says, look, if you're really wise, then you're the most peaceable and gentle person in the room. And if you don't believe me, when Jesus was being sneered at and mocked and beaten, who's the most peaceable one in the room? It says, the way the scriptures describe it is he's like a lamb before his shearers. He was silent. If you've ever seen a lamb sheared, typically by a shepherd who's, got a lot of sheep to shear, it's a big day. They're not just shearing one. They've got hundreds of these things to work through. And they will just grab that thing by the leg and whip them over to the table. I mean, it's amazing. And they're just running right through the sheep because they know how to do this, and they need to do 200 in the next 2 hours. And so they're going. It says, look, he's like a lamb that's been roughly treated, grabbed, and walks away naked. But didn't say anything. You can be convicted and also be the most peaceable person in the room. You can be good at listening and still be convicted. And along those lines, and we don't have the time to go into this, another problem that comes with conviction is sometimes a lack of empathy. But one of the things that I would have you do is consider the ideas of Romans 14, where Christians had a genuine disagreement over something that they had a conscience issue over. It's hard for us to imagine this, but in Romans 14, the early church had this problem. Now, all of a sudden, Christianity is entering into a not just Jewish world, but a Gentile world. And in that Gentile world, there were idols, temples, that people would bring their animals to. Those animals would be killed, and then they didn't eat all of them over at Zeus's temple. A lot of times what they would do is they would just sell it to the local meat market and butchers. So you go to the meat market, right? You go to Aldi, and you're going to go buy your meat, and you don't know, did that come from some guy's farm, or did that come from Zeus's temple or Athena's temple? And you don't know because they don't put it on the meat label. So there were two opinions within the church, two very strong opinions within the church. One of them was, since I can't know, no eating. I'm just going to eat vegetables. And I get that view. I mean, honestly, I don't know what I would do if I were in their shoes. I've never lived in that culture in that time, but I can understand the idea of, I don't know where that came from. Look, I went through a whole period where I didn't go to Starbucks because they said, hey, you Christians, we don't want your money. And I said, sounds good to me. I mean, like, what would it actually be like if I was going to the grocery store and I didn't know where that meat came from, and it might have just been offered to a false god? Maybe I'm a vegetable guy. But on the other hand, there were Christians who said, look, I know all that's going on, but I don't know, and I didn't offer it to an idol, and I know this. There's only one true and living God, which is also accurate, right? All the idols they're fake, they're pretend. So I'm just going to eat what I want, and as long as it's not offending somebody else's conscience. Now, if I go to dinner at somebody's house and I say, hey, we got this from Zeus's temple, well, then now I'm not eating it. But if I don't know, it's not my problem, because they're fake. And so there became a debate in the church. And in Romans 14, what's interesting about that is Romans 14, there's two places in the Bible that Paul will deal with this issue. One is Romans 14 and the other is over in 1 Corinthians. And then the 1 Corinthians one, he'll tell you there's a right answer. And the right answer is this: there's no such thing as an idol, they're all fake. Eat what you want. That's the biblical answer. That's the end result biblical answer. But in Romans 14, he doesn't tell you the right answer. He says, get along. In Romans 14, he says, look, when you're dealing with a brother who says, I can only eat vegetables, have compassion on him, and don't put a slab of meat on the table when you have him over. Maybe just eat a little bit more broccoli. It won't kill you. And when you're someone who thinks you can only eat vegetables, look, understand that he's serving the meat-eating Christians is serving the same God as you, and it's not your problem. He's going to serve God to the best of his ability, and just have a little empathy with each other. That's conviction. Have conviction, but also have empathy with other people who are growing. Because guess what? As a Christian, you're going to find your whole life you're growing. And if you don't find that, there's a bigger problem. It comes with the territory. Biblical conviction will change you, and it should change you, but not in those ways that we just talked about, right? That's not biblical conviction. Biblical conviction looks more like this. Daniel 1:8. Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with a portion of the king's delicacies, nor with the wine which he drank. Therefore he requested of the chief of the eunuchs that he might not defile himself. Daniel was a man with conviction. I can only eat food that God has said is clean. Remember this Old Testament, right? There were clean and unclean foods. And Daniel is now in Babylon, and he says, there's only one, I can't eat all this food they keep bringing me. And it says he did something. Daniel purposed in his heart. Biblical conviction looks like that. I'm not letting the outside things make the decisions for the life I'm going to live. I'm not going to let the culture, I'm not going to let MSNBC, I'm not going to let Fox News, I'm not going to let my neighbor, I'm not going to let whatever the latest cultural trend is, I'm not going to let any of those things decide who I am. The purpose, I'm going to purpose in my heart to serve the Lord. If tomorrow, for those of you who are married, if tomorrow your spouse stopped coming to services, would that affect your behavior? It would affect your life, right? Like if all of a sudden my wife just said, that's it, I'm done with God, I would be a wreck. But would it affect whether or not I serve God? It shouldn't. Right? It shouldn't. And the same is true the other way around. Like if tomorrow I just said, yeah, I'm done with this preaching thing, Jesus is a joke and I'm done. I would like to think that that would bother her. Not to speak for her too much, but I would like to think it would bother her. But I would like to think that the next Sunday morning she would be getting dressed and getting ready with all of the kids just like normal and saying, honey, I love you, but I know where I need to be. I've purposed in my heart. That's biblical conviction. It's not based upon everybody else. It's based upon the Lord. Psalm 57 verse 7. My heart is fixed, O God. My heart is fixed. I will sing and give praise. Hope is an anchor. It's biblical language. Hope is an anchor. What does an anchor do? It takes something that's movable, a ship, and then it fixes a point in which it will not move from. That's what an anchor does. When a boat drops anchor, what it's saying is, yes, the winds are going to toss and move. Yes, things are going to be hard. There will be some storms, whatever it is. But I'm not moving away from this fixed point. You need to decide, if you're going to have biblical conviction, you need to decide that there are certain things that are non-negotiable. And we have the old saying, we don't negotiate with terrorists. That's what I say at about bedtime with some of my small kids. Like, don't negotiate with terrorists. Go to bed. There's certain things you don't negotiate with, right? My faith is not negotiable. It can be tested. It can be tried. You read the Psalms. Read the Psalms and look for the David who's brokenhearted. You'll find him. Read the Psalms and look for the David who is so incensed at the world, that is so wicked and wrong and evil, and he just can't stand it anymore. And you'll find him. But you'll find in all of those Psalms where his emotions go up and down and all through the spectrum of it, my heart is fixed, oh God. My heart is fixed. This is non-negotiable. Psalm 112, verse 7, he will not fear evil tidings. His heart is steadfast, trusting in the Lord. Biblical conviction looks a lot like steadfastness. And steadfastness is an old-timey word for patience. Biblical conviction is patient. It's not about whether today is a good day in my faith. Don't assess your spiritual growth daily. I know that sounds weird to say that, but don't. Don't do it. Don't assess your spiritual growth daily. Maybe do it every quarter or every year. But don't do it daily. Because it's like trying to lose weight and standing on the scale every day. It's a bad decision. Because you know exactly what's going to happen. You're trying to lose weight, and you have one good day. And in fact, typically, the pattern is almost always the same. Ask the nutritionist. When you start to lose weight, when you first go on a diet and you start to lose weight, you lose weight really fast. And then, you know what often happens right after you have this quick plummet? And you're like, man, I'm going to lose 2,000 pounds in a week. It's going to be great. You know what happens next? You'll have an uptick. You haven't changed anything. You're still following the same plan. You're eating well. You're exercising, do all these things. What do you mean my weight went up? Now, it's not going to go up to where it was originally, but it's going to go up a little bit. And some of that's, you gain this thing called muscle. And it's cool, and it weighs more than fat. But that's not what you see. You see, I stood on the scale today, and my weight went up. Don't do that. And we do it with our spiritual growth. Don't spend every moment assessing where you're at. Just follow the plan. Because work works. And Jesus' plan works. You want to see your life transformed? You're going to have bad days. Oh man, are you going to have some bad days? Happy sermon, right? But you will. Like if the moment you decide, I'm going to follow Jesus and purpose in my heart to do what he says, you are guaranteed to have bad days. One, because you're human. And two, because there's somebody out there who really doesn't want you to have good days. And his name is Satan. Literally, his name means the adversary. Of course, this is not a one-person thing. You're not the only one in it. There is a spiritual being that hates to see you make spiritual progress. And he wakes up every morning, I don't know if he wakes up, but you get the idea, looking for a way to inhibit that. So don't assess your spiritual growth every day. Give yourself time and have the conviction to work the plan. Let your heart be steadfast. Proverbs 4:23 through 27, watch over your heart with all diligence, for from it flow the springs of life. Put away from you a deceitful mouth, put devious speech far from you. Let your eyes look directly ahead, and let your gaze be fixed straight in front of you. Watch the path of your feet, and all your ways will be established. Do not turn to the right nor to the left. Turn your foot from evil. You notice the language? Watch your heart and watch your eyes. So my preferred form of exercise is running. And so I will go running. And one of the things I like about running is it kind of frees my mind to kind of wander a little bit. I've got a mind that will wander all sorts of weird places. And so there's no distracting sounds. I don't run typically even with earphones or anything like that. I just go out running. But when I go out running and my mind is wandering, sometimes I'm not looking where I'm going. And you know what happens when my eyes aren't fixed where they're supposed to go? There's a little dip in the road, a little piece of concrete that's sticking up, and all of a sudden, I go sprawling. You've got to decide where you're going if your life's going to be successful. What do you want to be read on your tombstone? What do you want to be said at your funeral? And more importantly, what do you want God to say when you meet him? It's the most important meeting in your life. Figure out what you want him to say and do not look back. Set your gaze, fix your eyes. Acts 11, verse 22 through 23, we'll cover these very quickly, but it says the news about them, that is the church in Antioch, reached the ears of the church at Jerusalem, and they sent Barnabas off to Antioch. And then when he arrived and witnessed the grace of God, he rejoiced and began to encourage them with resolute heart to remain true to the Lord. Barnabas finds out there's this growing, strong Gentile church in Antioch, so they send the church in Jerusalem and says, Barnabas, you go up there and encourage them. Barnabas, son of encouragement. You go up there and encourage them. What does he tell them to do? Have a resolute heart and remain true to the Lord. The number one encouragement people need in life is, when you're going through junk, this is normal, hang on. This too shall pass. God is still on his throne. In Acts chapter 5, verse 40 through 42, they took his advice, and after calling the apostles in, they flogged them and ordered them not to speak in the name of Jesus. And then they released them. So they went on their way from the presence of the council, and what did the apostles do after being flogged? Rejoicing that they'd been considered worthy to suffer shame for his name. And every day in the temple and from house to house, they kept right on teaching and preaching Jesus as the Christ. The apostles didn't say, you know what, we've gotten this feedback from the Sanhedrin, and I can kind of feel the feedback on my back. Maybe we should reassess how much we preach Jesus. Is that what they did? No. They rejoiced they'd been considered worthy, and then they got up every morning and did what they had been doing. The bad days do not define who I am. 2 Timothy chapter 4, one of the reasons you need biblical conviction is because the time will come when they will not endure sound doctrine. Paul will tell Timothy to preach the word of God in season and out of season. The reason he says that is because there are good times for the gospel where the culture is just super receptive to it. And then there are seasons where it's not. Guess which ones are the ones that make you want to give up? The out of season times are rough. And I'm convinced, as Christians, we've been going through an out of season time in America. I just think we have. We have been an indulgent culture. We've told people just live as you please. We've said truth doesn't matter. We've done all of these things as a culture, as a social experiment. And so people have bought into this me culture. And then we're trying to preach Jesus to a group of people who are raised being told they're the center of the universe. And it's tough. But here's what I know. Winter's coming. But you know what comes right after winter? It's always spring. It's always spring. You preach the word in season and out of season. And when it's out of season, the ground may be a little bit tougher, but you'll get to in season. And the work that you do when it's hard sledding makes you strong for when the fields are whiter. I am convinced that the time that Christians prepare for the in-season times is the out-of-season times. And I don't think I'm wild in saying that, because even in sports, when do you prepare for the season? You don't start on the first game. You don't walk out there and say, hey, you guys want to figure out some plays? You do it when it's out of season. So if we feel like right now it's an out-of-season time, good. Good. Gives us time to get ready. Gives us time to figure out what our conviction is. Because the world is going to need convicted Christians to be a light the darker it gets. And believe me, when it gets dark enough, people start looking for light. And I don't know when the in-season begins and the out-of-season ends and all that kind of stuff. That's all for God. But I know this, whether it's in season or out of season, preach the word. Be ready. Be people of biblical conviction. Thank you so much for your time and attention. And we're going to sing a song. We're going to sing the second song in the songbook. I almost said Psalm 2. That's how wired I am for that. The second song in the songbook. If you are a Christian who needs the help of the saints here, please let us know. We love you. And more importantly, Jesus loves you. And if we can help you to obey him, to follow him, or to strengthen your conviction, we would be more than happy and honored to help in any way we can as we stand and sing.